Welcome to the third episode of Wicara. We are doing our special coverage of the general elections 2025. So we are right thick within the election period, and a lot has been said by candidates from either side of the political divide. The heat is definitely on, with Lee Hsien Loong coming into the fray and making very strong comments on the issue of mixing religion and politics. To help us demystify and unravel some of the things that have been said, we are very happy to have with us today Dr. Paul Tambyah, Chairman of the SDP and candidate for Bukit Panjang SMC. Welcome and thank you for taking time off your very busy schedule. Mr. P N Balji, a veteran journalist for more than 40 years.
Why you make me feel so old?
This is
okay, sorry.
To respect your vast, the breadth and depth of experience.
Okay, it's useful. Yeah. I always tell people having white hair or no hair is useful.
Editor of 3 newspapers?
Yes.
And an author, right? Yes.
Yes.
And Abdul Rahman who has been with us in the Wicara series, the co-founder of Suara, Melayu, Singapura. So welcome and thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The SDP has been trying very hard to make a comeback into Parliament, and I think a lot of Singaporeans carry this hope along with you. Could this be the GE to make that possible? So Paul, in GE 2020, you narrowly lost to Liang Eng Hwa. He won by a sheer margin of 53.73%. So what has been your sense of the ground sentiment over the last 5 years, and specifically during this election campaign?
Well, as you mentioned, we're trying very hard to get back into Parliament, and every election we think we have a chance. We work really, really hard. The last election, actually, we were quite pleasantly surprised to come close in both Bukit Panjang and Bukit Batok. And we have been working on the ground, and people are very encouraging. They give us a lot of very positive feedback. But the reality is we just don't have the resources of the PAP. And many people we talk to, they say, I support you, but my mother really likes this $1 deals where they pay $1 and they get a tray of eggs, or they pay $1 and they get these meals. And to be fair to Mr. Liang, he hasn't just started doing this like a lot of the other candidates. He's been doing this for more than a year. In fact, there's a chat group among the residents with many grassroots people involved. And the one question that our supporters cannot answer is, will he be able to continue the $1 meals? And I said, frankly, we cannot. We don't have that kind of resources, you see. And also conceptually, I don't think it's a good idea, to just try and, as we've said before, put a plaster on a raging wound, you see. Because you need to address the underlying structural issues, but that's a bit harder for people to grasp. Mm-hmm. So it is still an uphill battle.
Right. And your thoughts on this $1 and the free eggs thing? Who's funding this?
Yeah, this is all. I'm not sure who's funding it. I think it's CDC or People's Association, and this has been a bugbear of the opposition parties for years. Mm-hmm. That the losing candidate is appointed the grassroots advisor. So a lot of the projects have to go through the losing candidate, and that's really an insult to the voters, and it makes a mockery of this whole idea of democracy. Why hold an election if the loser is going to be the one with access to more funds than you are in the constituency?
Political curveballs. So
Sure.
We've seen that happen on the EBRC as the decision to, effectively change Bukit Batok.
Right.
How much has this been an impact on the SDP in terms of trying to make up for lost time and lost ground?
Well, it's been huge, and you can see the strategy work out. So EBRC was announced, Bukit Batok disappeared, where Dr. Chi got 45% of the vote the last time round. He was actually pretty close, and he's been spending 10 years there. I was speaking to a Dr Paul journalist, and she said, "What have you been doing the last 5 years?" I said, every week or we try and do something. Tuesday is my politics day, so we do a house visit, or if somebody calls us up and says they have this problem, we go and visit them. Whenever I'm in Singapore, I try and do something. We do a forum or something like that. So he's been doing the same in Bukit Batok on different days, and he's been going there, reaching out. They know him in the coffee shops, and then all of a sudden it's taken away. Yeah. And you can see their strategy. You see, they wanted him to go to Bukit Batok Jurong East, and that's got some of the very strong areas in the Jurong East area where Graceful was active, and there's parts of Taman's constituency where he's very, very strong. But we didn't fall into that trap, because he knows the 20,000 or so people in Bukit Batok. And to get to know another 100,000 people when you move from SMC to GRC is impossible in 9 days. You see. So it's much easier to get to know another 24,000 people rather than getting to know another 100,000 people. It's just physically impossible to do that. So we were stuck. We went to Sembawang West. I wasn't sure that he should have announced this straight away, but he did, and it was good because they hit the ground running when they did.
So has he been able to make up for lost time?
I mean, obviously can't in such a short period of time, and it's been a month, and you can see that the attacks have been this parachute, but that has backfired spectacularly because, they themselves moved Gan Kim Yong and what's his name to Tan Si Leng, my classmate, I mean, somebody showed me the brochure for Marine Parade, the PAP brochure, which has been distributed, still has Tan Si Leng's face on it, which is really kind of weird.
I think the issue of abandonment was raised by Mr. Ong Ye
That's
Kang,
right.
and we know
What happened
his
to
political
that?
journey, right?
Yes.
Turning to you, Balji,
Sure.
what do you see as a journalist, when you use the word veteran, as the key issues for Singapore voters for this GE?
I think the issues are somewhat obvious: cost of living, to a certain extent, immigration. But I personally feel that there are bigger issues which have not come out into the surface or onto the surface for whatever reason. The issues that I consider, for me, maybe it's more peculiar to me, and that is what kind of, it's from a very broad concept, what kind of society are we going to have, or do we want to have? I know it's a bit too broad, not so narrow. But taking that as a broad issue, and if you break that down, then there are issues which are, I think, very important for Singapore. And one of the things that worries me, concerns me, is the future of my grandchildren. My grandsons, one 16, one 11 years old. What is the future for them? And related to that is the jobs, right? Are the traditional jobs the one that they should study for, or should it be something else? First point. Second point is, even if you want to take up some other job which is not so traditional, does the school system prepare you for that? I doubt, because we are so exam focused, right?
Right.
And the new job world, I think,
Completely.
can you think on your feet, for example, right? And can you be a bit more rebellious? I don't mean a destructive rebel, but a rebel who will question, which I don't see in our young these days. So I think the job is a big issue. Nobody seems to be talking about it. I think that those are the big issues. Of course, economy and all that are issues. I won't go into that because I'm not an economist. I know not that much about economics, but I would say the social issues are the one that we all need to think about, talk about, hopefully tackle.
Thank you for that. Rahman, your thoughts on this and in the context of the Malay Muslim community in Singapore?
Well, I agree with Balji. In fact, for the Malay community, demographically, in terms of socio-economic status, the Malays tend to be more on the lower rung. So many of the bread and butter issues which we are facing now tend to be excavated among the Malay community. Jobs, cost of living, housing. If you think of these issues multiplied for the Malays. It becomes worse. Employment especially. I think occupational structure among the Malays has changed. We see more people in the gig economy, delivery guys and stuff like that. So what Singaporeans are facing in general, being excavated more for demographic reasons than anything else. And then there are specific issues that the Malays are grappling with. We talked about the mosque in Sembawang, about the warning not to mix religion with politics. Religion is very close to the Malays, to the Muslims. Religious issues need to be tackled, well, sensitively, but also in a broader framework of how we live as a community, as a society in Singapore, where other communities are concerned. To label specific issues as religious issues and therefore sensitive issues, I think is a grave mistake because it is integral to the life of the Malays. I think that for better understanding and harmony, which is also being touted, there should be a re-examination of how we view some of these issues, because these are not isolated issues for the Malays themselves. They are effects for the rest of Singapore as well. And I also think there is one constituency that we have neglected in this election. Not just the PAP, but also all the parties. It's the elderly. There are statistics that by this year, about 20% of the population will be 65 years old and above. That's a very big constituency, any way you look at it. And there are specific issues, specific problems that need to be addressed. Health, which is natural, but also things like retirement planning, retirement financing, housing with lease decay. So these things need to be addressed at some point in time. They are not addressed now, but they will become a big problem in the years to come. Yeah?
Pak Rahman, you mentioned the preservation of an old mosque. I think that was in reference to Masjid Tempatan Melayu, a very grand, a lovely, charming mosque there. Now, Ong Ye Kung made a promise that he will work with URA to preserve the mosque. But this is against the backdrop just a couple of days ago, where we see many PAP leaders, including Lee Hsien Loong, making a lot of very strongly worded statements from the PAP leadership, warning against mixing politics and religion. Now, this story about preserving the mosque was splashed obviously in the Malay dailies, Berita Harian and Berita Media Corp on their website. The question is it not mixing religion and politics? Are we seeing double standards here?
Yeah, I think so. It's pretty obvious here. See, the hypocrisy and the blatant double standards here. And it's this idea, there's one rule for me and one rule for you, which has been the way they've played this right from Lee Kuan Yew's time. So that's a big concern, and it's something we're definitely going to bring up. The idea is that Singapore is a secular state. I told a story a couple of days ago about Daman Huri, who's been on this program. When he first joined the SDP, I told him, we had an interview, and I said, SDP is socially liberal in some issues. Mm-hmm. And he said, I know Singapore is a secular state. Mm-hmm. He says, I have my own views, I hold them very strongly, right. But when it comes to working for economy, for healthcare, all those things, I put my own views aside, because we're doing it for the good of Singapore. And so that's been the SDP stand right from the beginning, see, is that we are a secular state, and you should be, neutral. You shouldn't put down one particular race or religion, which unfortunately tends to be the perception of what's going on.
Actually, in relation to this about religion and mixing religion with politics, I think it's the same bogeyman, that has been unleashed, right?
Exactly.
Which we have seen. People who are older would have gone through this, and this bogeyman has come to the forefront because of the Gaza issue. I think
right.
I think that has kind of made it into a bigger issue. And if you look closely at how did this become an issue, it became an issue because of the way the government responded or didn't respond to the Gaza crisis.
Right.
And to me, it's a purely humanitarian crisis. Leave aside the politics.
Exactly.
Where is that? Are we
humanity,
humane people?
Yeah.
And we keep saying, we hear them saying, two-state solution.
Yeah.
But that's not the issue.
Well, they haven't even recognized the Palestinian state yet.
Yeah. So I think that, for want of a better word, I will say scaremongering. In the 9 days.
Right.
But I think that the public is not going to be scared. Generally speaking, it's not like what it was 20 years ago. You can't use this tactic anymore, I feel. Yeah?
There's also the issue of stereotyping. Every time you talk about politics versus religion, it's always the Malays, it's always the Muslims, and that creates perceptions in the minds of the non-Malays, of the non-Muslims, and that doesn't help at all in harmony, in instilling.
And it's actually not true.
Especially when it's not
because if you look at this particular election, I don't want to go into it, but I think that Minister Shanmugam has been courting various groups, and I think there has been some influence on his decisions, and so as you correctly pointed out, religion is very important for many people in Singapore. There are a growing number of young people who are, without religion. But still, amongst people, at least especially people in the older age group,
Yes.
Religion is very important for people in the older age group, regardless of their religion. Buddhists, Christians, the Taoists, Hindus, and Muslims. Especially when you grow older, you start thinking about what happens next.
Yes.
Yes. Balji, you mentioned...
No, can I just add to this point?
yes, please.
Just a quick one, and that is the I use the word bogeyman, but I don't think, as what you said, but the Malay Muslims, right, are the ones who are being targeted. But I think the people who are not Malay Muslims are also smarter now.
Yeah.
They are not going to be influenced. I'm talking again very generally, So I think it's not going to be that easy. It's not going to be an easy game. Sorry.
You mentioned bogeyman, and I think Lee Hsien Loong mentioned Tang Liang Hong
Exactly,
in his
and
speech.
Donald Low brought that up.
Yeah.
Yes. What are your thoughts? I mean,
No, I
you
think-
probably covered that story when you were
Oh yeah,
active
of
on
course.
the ground.
Yeah, I got a long story to tell, which I've reported it which I
In your
mentioned
book,
it in
right?
my book.
Yeah.
Yeah. But the point is, again, I come back to the original point that kind of a Tan Liang Hong, if you try that now, I doubt it will succeed. Right?
Right.
But that time, it was very different.
Right.
Lee Kuan Yew was at his rogue best,
Yes.
right? And he more or less could do whatever he wanted. And he could not just demolish Tan Liang Hong, but he could chase him out of the country. He was forced to run from the country, right?
Right.
Put a Marua injunction on his property and all that. I don't think that tactic will work anymore. Yeah.
Or for that matter, Jufri
Oh, yeah.
in the 80s.
Yeah.
His
It's
campaigning,
crazy.
all he did was say,
Inshallah.
Alhamdulillah. It wasn't inciting. It was
Exactly.
a normal part of a speech in Malay,
Exactly.
by a Muslim. But the way Wong Kan Seng
Yeah.
turned it around and talked about how he's brought
Religion into politics
into
again.
politics. And the big difference, of course, at that time was the press was controlled.
Right. There was no
There
social
was
media.
the gatekeeper
That's right.
filtering it, and the people have no opportunity to voice their objections, to even correct Wong
Right.
Kan Seng. Try that today in the age of social media,
Yeah.
and I think they're smart enough not to try that, so they're doing other tricks.
No, he's right, because I think the social media is a game changer.
Right.
Right? It's a real game changer, especially in this election, with podcasts becoming...
Like this.
Like this one.
Yeah, like this one. Yeah, like this one. Nobody can control it, right?
Right.
The only people who can control is ourselves.
That's
We,
right.
we
Yeah.
control it. So I think that is from a Singapore, from a media perspective, that has changed everything. And as a result of that, I don't know how many of you follow the Straits Times closely. That the election in 2015, the coverage, and today, it's a big difference.
Very different. Yeah.
A big difference. You see the amount of space they give the opposition. Every morning I'm watching CNA at 6 o'clock, right? And say, I'm surprised, man. that
Why
they
do
are-
you think that's happening?
Well, I think
they
they, have
can't
to.
control it?
No, they
There's
have
no
to,
way. Yes,
because
yes.
otherwise the social media will just
Will
outstrip them.
overtake that. Yeah.
And in fact, I've told this story before. I had dinner a few weeks ago with a colleague from Poland, and he's about my age. So he grew up under communism. And he said, as a kid, they knew that anything that came in the official media was false. So they depended entirely. And in those days, before social media, people used to photocopy documents and then pass, or carbon copy and pass them around. He said that's where they got their news from. So CNA and Straits Times, they do not want to end up like Pravda. So they need to maintain some credibility in an era of social media.
Yeah.
So they cannot be so
And I think
blatant.
the government knows this.
That's right.
Because the CNA and Straits Times are not going to do something which is, for want of a better word, bold, if they don't get the approval of the government, right? So I think the government also realizes it. They have to. And they themselves are now on podcasts,
Right.
right?
Sometimes excessively so.
Doesn't matter. It's good to have as many people as possible, So social media is a game changer as far as I'm concerned for this election.
Yeah. So Paul, Ong Ye Kung also, yesterday in his rally speech said that SDP's proposal did not have a snowball's chance of contributing to Singapore.
Right.
Although we can argue that the analogy is
The
incomplete.
analogy, that's right.
He meant snowball's chance
In hell. Yeah.
So strong words.
Right.
And this was in reference to healthcare and housing.
Right.
So your response?
Yeah, frankly, a few weeks ago, actually, even before the election, as we were preparing for this, I become a fan of AI. So I asked ChatGPT and DeepSeek. I said, what are the policies that were proposed by the SDP that were eventually adopted by the PAP, and how long did it take? And they came up with a nice list. They came up with streaming. 1994, we proposed the elimination of streaming, and they said, "Oh, it cannot be done. This is a crazy Western idea. We have to channel our resources to the best students, and we have to do appropriate teaching for the rest." Now, 2024, they have full subject-based banding, except in the IP and SAP schools. So they adopted, but watered down. Similarly for healthcare, in 2011, MediShield did not cover cancer. It did not cover diabetes. All the pre-existing illnesses were not covered. And MediShield had been in place since 1990. So there's 21 years it never covered diabetes, pre-existing diabetes or cancer. And then, of course, we put up our plan. It also helped us that Obamacare came in around the same time. So they had a MediShield Life review. Then they came up with MediShield Life, which now does cover cancer, diabetes, and pre-existing illnesses. So, there's this famous quotation from Gandhi, apparently from Gandhi, don't know whether it's really true. He says, first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, and then you win. And that's been our idea.
So we are waiting for the last one.
Last one, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
What's your thoughts on that?
No, I mean, very similar to what Paul has said, that I didn't know the details that he mentioned. I'm glad that he has brought this up, then now I know. And I think the Workers' Party has also said the same thing, right? About adopting some of the proposals that we have made. I think the tactic by the PAP is to wait for a long time.
Yeah.
Memory, right?
Yeah.
Well, they sort of said that the opposition parties just take a half step right and half step left, or repackage some of the comments made. So your thoughts?
I was way before them, 1994. That was soon after the Goh Keng Swee report. I don't know if you remember that, where they completely revamped the. I mean, the Goh Keng Swee report was 1978 when they realized that the Hokkien Ping, couldn't read or write in either English or Mandarin. It was like a significant portion of the recruits in the Singapore Armed Forces. And so he said something had to be done. And, he got in all these systems engineers. That's right. And so they said, okay, so we divide everybody up. This is the special, express, normal academic, normal technical. And it really ramped up the pressure on the PSLE because it was a one-size-fits-all approach. And so the PSLE became a make or break. Because if you get into special, then you've got a good chance, you can go to university, all that. You get a normal technical, your life is really tough.
I mean, education is one of my favorite topics now, and I would say that I think from what I've read, from what I've seen, what I've heard, I think the government wants to change the education system. But its biggest problem, if it really wants to change to another, let's say in international schools, for example, where are the teachers? Do the teachers who have been trained this way for so long make this big leap to teaching in a totally different way?
Actually, I think they can. If you go to, we like to go to Coronation Plaza to have to eat, and you see all these tuition centers, and they all advertise their ex-MOE teachers from RI, from Hwa Chong, from SGI, whatever. But they are so much happier when they are teaching a smaller class size, when they're given the freedom to be creative. They don't have to do all those administrative tasks that they have to do. So I think we do have the teachers, but it's just that they're squeezed into this MOE
But
mindset.
even these tuition teachers, they are still teaching according to a certain
they are,
syllabus,
but they could,
preparing you
they
for
could
a
do
certain
more.
exam, right?
I agree.
But that doesn't happen because both my grandsons are in international school.
Right. Oh, you can see the difference, right?
Well, I tell you, the difference is just unbelievable. I mean, they have just blossomed. Of course, we got problems at home because they are defiant.
Yeah.
But that's a small.
But you need more rebels.
But that's a small problem.
Rahman, sorry.
Yeah. No, it's a structural problem also. Demographics, the population is shrinking, there are less school children, and yet the class sizes
Are still the same.
still the same. Teachers, as you say, are
That's a
still
big one,
burdened with
admin tasks,
overhead and stuff like that. So what does it mean for the quality of education? Let alone, as you probably mentioned, the kind of education that your grandchildren or other children should be having. So the structural problem is just as critical.
Yeah.
The thing is, the government seems to be happier shutting down schools.
Right, rather than
Yeah.
allowing bigger class sizes.
Exactly. So I can't wrap my head around that.
No, it's this whole concept of Singapore Incorporated, which is, like SPH became a property development company.
Yep.
So a lot of these schools are located in really good locations.
Yes.
Somebody is seeing a condo in the back of their mind.
Okay, Paul. I don't want to focus on the SDPM manifesto. Interestingly, you had proposed that maternal and pediatric services should be largely free and funded by the government. Could you tell us more about the thinking on this?
So that actually harks back to the 1960s, when we had these maternal and child health clinics, and you just pay $1. And that rapidly brought down the infant mortality rate. In 1981, when they did the blue paper review of Singapore's healthcare system, Singapore already at that time had an infant mortality rate that was better than the US, and it was comparable to the UK. And the reason was because every corner you went, there was an OPD or there was a maternal and child health clinic. So they made sure, and this was even in the kampongs, in the rural areas, in the farms, they had these nurses and midwives who used to go out there, and it had great outcomes. And it was done at a very low budget. At that time, we had socialized medicine. It was a national health service kind of thing. The first restructuring of healthcare happened in 1985. So this is way before that. So it can be done in Singapore. You can achieve good outcomes, but you have to change the system. It cannot be a hospital-centric. Everybody goes to this fancy hospital where you have this birthing suite and all this kind of thing. It has to go back to primary care. And that's happening a lot in many parts of the world. So we've talked about nurse-led care. There are fewer and fewer midwives in Singapore, but that's actually a good profession. This is something where, and it can be done out of your own home. There's so many nurses who quit the profession, especially when they have kids, they quit the profession. But overseas, you see many of them coming back part-time, and they arrange their schedule to do this, you see. So, and this is where, we really need the mindset change to allow people the flexibility to work from home. Like we had a home care service that we did, and the nurse lived in Choa Chu Kang area. So we said, look, why don't you go and see a few patients first? Go from your home, go and see them, go and get these things done, and then you come to work. And we clock it all in, and you can document what you've done. You see, you've seen the patient, you take a photograph, you write the record. And it worked really, it was a win-win, you see. So she drops her kid off at childcare or at school, then she goes, sees a few patients, and she's there. The patient doesn't have to come to the hospital. But it became untenable, see, because there was issues with the paperwork, with the reimbursement, and basically it's about trust, you see. So the administration doesn't trust that she's actually going there and seeing. I said, look, we've got the documentation, we've got the photograph, we've got the report, we've got the wound for the patient. They say, oh no, what about in between if she goes and does something? I said, well, so what? If in between she goes and buys
Exactly,
what's the big deal? What you're interested in is whether this old guy gets treated for his wound infection, in my case, but, and doesn't come back to hospital and cost the taxpayer, thousands of dollars a day. So if she does need to go and run an errand in between, so what? That's my take on it. As long as the care is provided and the deed is done.
My question is, if the solution is so obvious, why is it not happening?
And I think it's because of trust. You see, it's like this, they roll out all these subsidy schemes, the trust and all that. They're good schemes, but they put in so many regulations, and the reason is they want to catch the 2 or 3% who are cheating the system. So the other 97% has to suffer. See, this is the trouble with, I think, unfortunately, it's a carryover from Lee Kuan Yew's time. And it's also been exacerbated by the neoliberal point of view. I tell the story a lot. Ronald Reagan used to talk about the welfare queen who's driving a Cadillac. In reality, she didn't exist. There was nobody. The level of welfare in the US is actually quite low. It's not enough to buy a beaten up Ford, let alone a Cadillac. But he told the story so many times that people tended to believe it. So they think that everybody is trying to abuse in Singapore, the equivalent is the old guy who takes out his CPF and goes to Batam and squanders it. See, in reality, most of these old guys who go to Batam, they have nothing in their CPF because they were odd job workers and, they drank away all their money while they were still working. So there's nothing left.
Paul, you mentioned in one of your rally speeches that you think the healthcare workers here work very hard.
Right.
But it's a system that's broken.
Right.
Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so again, this is not an exclusively Singaporean problem. This is a problem when it comes to corporatisation of healthcare. And I made this point, and a lot of people have picked up on it, commented on it. In Singapore, non-lawyers cannot own a law firm. Non-accountants cannot own an accountancy firm. But the Singapore clinics are being sold left, right, and center to venture capitalists, to hedge funds, and those people are not interested in the healthcare. They're interested in return of investment for their investors. So unfortunately, they cut corners, they try and downsize, they force their staff to work ridiculous hours just to meet certain turnover requirements. Their KPIs are no longer whether the patient gets better, but whether the patient gets referred to a specialist in a practice that they also own. So these kind of things are very widespread, unfortunately, and they're coming in and they're creeping in. And if they dominate the private healthcare sector, there's bound to be spillover impact on the public sector.
I think
back to the bogeyman about mixing politics with religion.
Yeah.
I can't help. This is my sense, my own intuition. In 2021, the government allowed nurses to wear
tudung.
the
Correct.
tudung. After what?
Years and years,
More than 10 years
Right.
of debate, acrimony. And shortly after allowing the nurses to wear tudung, I noticed a severe shortage of nurses. And I wonder whether the two are related.
I don't think so. But what I think happened is that that opened up opportunities in the private sector. And the sad thing is, Singapore nurses are very well qualified, very well trained, and they are so attractive for Australia. And Australia changed the rules. Now a Singapore nurse who arrives there on day 2 can get PR. So, you can imagine you're struggling to pay for your HDB flat. You sell your 3-room HDB flat. You buy a house with a garden.
And a swimming pool.
And a swimming pool. and as a nurse in Australia, you're respected. You're given a decent salary. You have benefits. It is very hard for them to... And they've been allowed to wear the tudung in Australia for years.
But nurses also face a high attrition rate.
They do. They do, and it's the I think a lot of it is part of the culture. Unfortunately in Singapore, a lot of people think nurses are like maids. They ask the nurse to go and get them something which they could easily do themselves.
Right.
So the professionalism of nurses is not recognized enough, and that is something that we have emphasized in our healthcare plan. We talked about this void deck nursing-led healthcare. And a lot of nurses have come up to us and said they really like to do that. And it makes more sense, you see. You live in the block. You know the people who live in the block. You know the uncle who never comes out. You know the guy who's smoking like a chimney, And then you can relate to your own neighbors in that sense.
On the issue of healthcare, Ong Ye Kung had made this statement. I attended a dialogue session.
Right.
My wife was there as well, and he made this statement that if you want subsidies in healthcare, you got to wait.
Right.
So something has to give. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so this doesn't make sense, you see. Because then they're not subsidies. You see, subsidies means that you're getting the same healthcare, but you're paying less, you see. So an example of this is if you go online, I can't remember who it was who asked the question. It may have been one of the backbenchers or it may have been Gerald Giam. He asked what was the waiting time for a clinic appointment in a public hospital. And so I can't remember, it was Yikang or one of the SMSs. And they said for a private patient in a public hospital, waiting time is 9 days, 10 days. For a public patient, it can be 30 days, 40 days, 50 days. A subsidized patient, 30 days, 40 days, 50 days. But that doesn't make sense because they've always said the only difference between a private patient and a subsidized patient in a public hospital is you get to choose your doctor. So if you're very picky, you want to choose your doctor, how come your wait is shorter than somebody who will take the next available doctor? It doesn't make sense, you see. So it tells you that there's essentially a 2-tier system, which anybody who has gone into a public hospital knows, you see, that there is a 2-tier system. And that's not subsidy. You see, subsidy is like when you go into, like most of this universal health insurance scheme. And as you go into a clinic, you get the same treatment, it just depends on who pays. If you're not subsidized, you pay in full. If you're subsidized, the government pays part of it. And the government has done that with CHAS Blue and CHAS Orange. You go to the same GP, you get the same treatment as the guy who's paying cash, but the difference is the government is paying part of it. So there's no difference like that. There's no difference in waiting time. The GP doesn't say, oh, you're CHAS, you wait. You're not CHAS, you're paying cash. Oh, yours, your company is paying, you come first. It's no such thing. You go to a GP, they just see you in the order in which you come. And that's the way it should be if it's truly a subsidy, which is what CHAS is. So what I'm saying is that it's not impossible for the government to change. They've already changed a small part. They just need to look at the whole system and try and address that.
Okay, let's go back to, I think one of the points you raised is that systemically you have non-medical companies
Right.
or, PE, VC funds owning hospitals and running it like a for-profit entity. What would be your alternative policy suggestion on this?
Yeah, we wouldn't allow that. And we would probably put a moratorium. I mean, you can't go back right now. But we would put a moratorium on PE owning medical practices. And then, you see, we would try and build it up. The government is trying very, very hard to get a vendor to take over, to run a not-for-profit hospital. There's only one not-for-profit hospital in Singapore. That's Mount Alvernia. All the others are for-profit. They're classified as for-profit hospitals, even the so-called public hospitals. So apparently they've been talking to Renzi, and so I met the CEO of Renzi at an event. I said, hey, why don't you take it? You all have the resources. He said, you got to be kidding. He said, one thing he says, we may want to do it. They run a very good step-down care facility. But he says, once you take it, and the government puts in all these regulations and things like that. So they tie one hand behind your back. So, but he says we're negotiating. So, I mean, hopefully something like that will come through. But it's been a while since they announced it. It wasn't the CEO. I can't remember who it was. I don't want to implicate anyone.
Okay, let's switch topics. Balji, you mentioned earlier about there hasn't been enough discussion on the Singapore that we want. So I'm going to just talk about the politics that we want. What is the politics that we want? I mean, historically there's lots of a lot of negativity in terms of the way elections are being run, all kinds of threats and actual threats being executed. So we have moved somewhat since then. I think we have. But do you think where we are right now is the kind of politics that we want? Do you think that the ruling party or maybe even the opposition parties are taking personal attacks, the issue of personal attacks? Is that still happening?
Yeah, I think, if you take the present campaign, it's quite clear, right? No? I don't have to go into the details. My only hope is that once the heat is off, elections are off, they will go back and do what I think they should do, and that is what I would call clean politics, right? What do I mean by clean politics? That means, you make sure that, let's say, SDP comes, Bukit Panjang, Paul wins, and we all hope that he will win.
I hope so too.
No, I hope so. I really hope so. Anyway, so if he wins, then how they will treat him, right? Will they in Parliament, bully him or things like that, Which, to be fair to the government, I don't think they have been doing that in a kind of a regular fashion.
Except to Leong Man Wai.
Young Man Wai, yeah. I would say that the one person they don't want in Parliament is Dr. Chi.
That's right. Yeah.
They don't want him, for whatever reason.
Right.
Because maybe it's history, maybe it's the fact that they don't trust him. My personal view, I don't know Chi personally, but I'm just watching him as an outsider, and I've seen that he has mellowed. And the fact that Paul has joined him, to me, it says that Dr. Chi is changing. Whether he's a changed man or not, I don't know. But he is changing, right? So you should be able to not use the old inhibitions that you had to people who might have changed. Give them an opportunity, right? And if they go to Parliament and do things which the public doesn't like, they can vote him out. I mean, that's 5 years,
that's democracy. Yeah,
that's what democracy is all about, right?
Yeah.
So I would, to answer your question directly, I think we need politics that is clean. Accept, if there's a defeat, accept it, right? Don't, cry over spilled milk, this is what democracy is all about. Do you want our citizens to be democratic? I was talking to my grandson today, who's 11 years old. The best part of my day is to walk him to the MRT station, which takes about 10 minutes. So I have to plan what topic to talk to him.
Okay.
Yeah? So today was about, he himself said, let's talk about the Singapore elections. I say, okay, what do you want to talk about? He said, I think I should form a children's party. I say, great. Let's do it. Think about it. What do you want to put? Who are the people you want to put there? What's your manifesto? Then he asked me, what is manifesto? Then I have to explain to him. All this is I feel, but not in a big way. I think there are all these things happening, right. And I think politics will change. It's not that it does not change; it has changed, but it will change.
Yeah, Paul, I hope you don't come from the same lousy school that...
No. Well, my pre-U, I was there. I was 10 years in St. Andrews.
But you have to give a response to that. Your thoughts on that. Has it been a cleaner electioneering campaign for you?
Well, it's very hard to say. I mean, they've attacked the SDP. You wouldn't believe there's actually another party contesting in Sembawang. But but the reality is that it's sort of par for the course. It's kind of the thing that we've come to expect within the SDP, and there's still a few more days left in the campaign. And the concern is that on May Day, with all the May Day rallies and May Day events, they're going to say all kinds of things that we have no chance to answer. So, in fact, we took the action on the POFMA. When we made a media statement on the activists who went to, and we were kind of hoping that we'd be assigned May 2nd as the date. Then we would get some. But they're too smart. There's no way they would give that to us. Yeah. So I mean, I think it's too early to say how this campaign is going to turn out.
Coming back to your question, I think the big question is, we are changing, right? But is that enough? I think that's the big question, right? Between government on one side, your population on the other side, is there, from the population's point of view, are they happy with the changes? Do they think it is too little? Or it's a difficult question to answer. I mean, we can only base it on anecdotes, So,
yeah. So, turning to the electorate, I mean, you see a bunch of younger voters coming up. From your experience in meeting these people, do they have slightly different aspirations from the older voters?
Oh, they have completely different aspirations, and it's kind of a generational thing. We're talking about even Gaza. A lot of people think that, Donald Trump ran this great campaign and he won, but actually he got 3 million fewer votes than he did in 2020. But what happened was Kamala got 11 million fewer votes than Joe Biden got in 2020. And what happened was the young people of all races and religions just couldn't tahan what was going on and the fact that the US was backing the destruction of Gaza. So there are many issues which are important to young people, and we're finding this out. We've been finding this out along the way. We talk to them. The climate is very important to young people, and it makes sense. If you're 60 years old, what's going to happen 100 years from now is not going to affect you. But if you're 20 years old, you're really concerned about what's going to happen in the next 30, 40 years. Rising sea levels. Last year was the hottest year on record. So these are things which are issues which are big for young people. And the other issue is the social media. These are what they call digital natives, right? So they grew up with social media, which is why your grandson wants to be a tech entrepreneur.
Yeah, I'm glad.
Yeah, I mean, he's caught the wave, right? So they have they grew up in this world, and this world is very different because there's relatively less fear than there was in the old world.
Yeah, and also, I mean, just one point on the young people. They have something which I didn't have, and I'm sure you didn't have, Paul, and you didn't have, and that is, I can pack my bag and go off anytime, which I didn't have. I'm sure you didn't have it.
Although actually I did to a certain end, because I did my postgrad in the US.
Okay. No, but
in fact, one of the reasons why people used to do postgraduate overseas is in case things don't turn out well in Singapore, then they can go, because the Singapore qualifications are not universally recognized. But if you've got a UK or US or
so one of the things that I ask my friends, I meet them every day, 5 to 6:37, and one of the questions that if I get new people coming into the group, how many children are in Singapore?
right.
Invariably, at least one is outside Singapore, right? So what does that mean? My daughter, I got 2 daughters, one lives here, the other one lives in Toronto. She has been there for more than 15 years, and she won't come back. I told my wife she will never come back, because, I mean, apart from the freedom, I mean, that's one factor. It's the space, you see. And I'm talking about space, I mean both physical space and the other space, political space, right? You go there, she will never want to come back. Although she still hasn't given up her Singapore citizenship, but I don't think she will come back. So there are more people like that, right? And that is a big factor, to what extent. How big this is, I don't know, but it is a factor.
Paul, young people, how do you think they see the ruling party? Is there still an appeal for them?
Well, I mean, I think it's interesting because originally we would have thought that the young people would, be rebellious and want more space and be squeezed by all the cost of living issues. But in 2015, when you look at the demographics, I think there was some analysis that were published. The PAP did very well in the old, and they also did very well in the 21 to 25 age group. And my thinking is that was the first generation that went through the national education. So national education, which is what they learn in school, is actually quite powerful I looked at one of my nephew's textbooks, the P5 textbook, and it was appalling. They were given, this is for P5, this is social studies or something, and they were given a picture of this gleaming, office building or HDB building, and then they were given a picture of a slum in the Philippines. And the question is, one is Philippines, one is Singapore, what's the difference? And the answer is there's a good government in Singapore. This is P5 students. So if you start learning that kind of thing, it's kind of hard to...
It's not learning, it's brainwashing.
Exactly, in a way it is.
So that being the case, how does that square, the PAP has been resistant
Right.
in terms of lowering the voting age to
Right.
18. So if the younger are the young ones are finding the PAP still appealing to them, then how do
Well,
you
I think
rationalize
part of the
that?
thing is they're unpredictable. So even though they think national education has had its effect, or that any kind of program has had its effect, they're not sure. And young people change very quickly. See, so if some things go viral on social media, then also there's less control, and that may be the reason why they're a bit reluctant. Because in Malaysia, what happened, right? On the one hand, you've got the Western states, and then you've got what happened on the Eastern states. So it was a double-edged sword for both sides, because the young people, they actually moved in very different directions.
Okay. So, Paul, if the SDP gets to Parliament,
Right.
and we hope all the success for you,
Thank you.
how will the SDP be different from the other parties, from WP, PSP?
Well, for one thing, I think we probably have more in common than we have that's different. Because many of the issues that PSP and WP have brought up about healthcare, like I said, Gerald has been really good bringing up healthcare issues. PSP has brought up about housing. These are very similar to issues that we brought up. So what we would be doing is refining them in line with our policies and things that we have thought about. But I think what most people know is that SDP is the fearless party. So we pushed the envelope. We were the first people to do a party political podcast 20 years ago. Then it got banned. Then we were the first people to do a humorous campaign ad. And then that got banned. So we pushed the envelope. And I think that's what people are hoping we'll kind of do in Parliament. Within the boundaries of parliamentary procedures, and if best case scenario, the two of us or more than that, then we can propose a motion and second it. But if it's only one of us that gets in, we can try and persuade PSP or somebody to second the motion.
Do you see potential for an alliance between the
What the interesting thing, James Gomez is with us as a political scientist. He has a lot of experience in the region. And he said in Southeast Asia, for some reason, alliances happen after elections.
Yes.
You see in Malaysia, you see in Thailand, the alliances happened after the elections. So, best case scenario, of course, we hope that a significant number of alternative parties get in. But in reality, I don't think that's going to happen. So maybe 2 elections down the road.
Balji and Paraman, what do you feel are some of the issues that really needs to be focused on in the last few days of campaigning?
I've already talked about it. I think what is the future of Singapore? What are we going to face? Don't talk to me about your tariffs. I really think the tariffs issue has been blown a bit. Because Singapore is not in a situation where many other countries are in, right? And we are 10%. But of course, there are other issues like goods from other countries, which come here or don't want to go to, let's say, for example, to America, they will cost more, right? So I think it is really the big issue for me is what is the future, where nobody has really painted in this election. What is the kind of Singapore they want to see? I'm not saying in 5 years, maybe 10 years. No, I have not seen any. Which, I would like to know if there is one. It's a bit too airy-fairy.
It's a good tip.
No, maybe it's too airy-fairy.
Yeah.
Maybe not many people think like me, but maybe I'm different. But that
I
to me
think
is, sorry.
It's entirely valid. I mean, you must have a vision. This is the vision for Singapore in the
For
next
me?
5-10 years.
No, for
For
anybody in
for any
politics.
party.
Yeah, they have, but it's not been articulated
Right,
as far as I know.
Okay, tomorrow night's speech, you listen.
Thank you very much.
Paraman, yeah.
Quote me.
I'd like to see all the parties concerned address that one constituency that I talked about, the elderly,
Right.
because demographically it's significant.
Yep.
2, the issues are very relevant. Issues facing them, they can be quite worrying, debilitating for them. I'd like to see the parties address that constituency. We've got a few days left. And I think they're worth a few more votes.
That's actually a good idea. Because, generally, to be totally honest, the thinking in, I think, both the PAP and the opposition is the elderly think PAP equals Lee Kuan Yew. So either love Lee Kuan Yew or they hate Lee Kuan Yew, and they vote according to that kind of approach.
Yeah, I'm not so convinced.
Probably,
I get the view. I mean, again, talking to my people, my friends who are about my age, they are. I think they the first point is they feel that under Lee Kuan Yew they had a better life.
Right.
Right? I think nobody kind of disputes that, but they are very unhappy with what's going on. One, employment. Once you lose your job, that's it.
Right.
Get back into the system is very difficult. So I met today, as usual, talking to taxi drivers is the best.
Yes.
And he gave me one earful. I couldn't get a word in. And he was talking about this, right? He was a security guard and he had a kind of a senior position. And after a certain age, I think 62, he was retrenched, right? That's ridiculous, right? So now he drives Grab.
Right.
And and driving Grab is not easy. I mean, you gave it a name called gig economy. I think that is giving it a bit of a Sikiata status. But really, it's a hard job. They have to pay for the rent, which is 120, I think. Then they have to pay for insurance, and you are sitting there doing nothing. I mean, other than driving, what kind of a
life?
What kind of a life? What kind of do you get any exercise? I hope they drink water, if nothing else. So that the old folk is a big issue. Somehow is not come out into the surface. I go through it every day, right? Walking on the pavement is a big problem for me because there are two people coming this way. Where do I go? And they don't even care,
So they're in a hurry or they're looking at their phone.
Yeah. So I go there, I stop in front of them and I say, "Excuse me." I'm not going to give it,
Right.
So then they realize they have done something wrong. So and that irritates me. Maybe cause my blood pressure to go up, but it irritates me. I don't know how many people feel that same way.
Okay.
But I must just say that I occasionally take the bus, and I find the bus drivers
Very nice.
extremely
Very
courteous.
nice, yeah.
They will not move until I sit down,
Right.
which I find,
Yeah, they're good.
very good. Yeah.
So last point, I know Paul has to rush for a lunchtime rally at the Fullerton. All the best for that.
Thank you.
Your last words of advice to the voter in a sentence. Let's start with you, Paul.
My biggest wish is that you vote for who you think is or what you think is a better future for Singapore. Do not be afraid. There's still this fear factor. And frankly, in this day and age, as we've discussed considerably over this period of time, there's no reason to be afraid. You should just vote your conscience. Vote what you think is right. And just forget what all these people tell you.
Thank you. Balji?
I would say that, this is a new thing that has happened to me because I'm going to the polling station on Saturday. How am I going to vote? So I've told myself I'm going to look at the candidates, not the parties. Right? Because I think if I find somebody who's a good candidate,
Right.
of course mine is a GRC,
Right.
I will vote for him.
Yeah.
Then the next question will be, what if both candidates are bad?
Spoil your vote.
So what do you do?
So I live in Bishan. My voting center is RI. To walk from my place to RI takes me about 7 minutes.
Right.
So walking there, I will decide. I know it's a cop-out answer, but
So it's a critical last 7 minutes.
yeah.
Very good. Very good.
Rahman?
Well, I'm aware that there are three forces at work in the minds of being targeted towards the voter. That's fear, uncertainty, and doubts. These three forces are very powerful forces that shape the perception and the minds of the voter. And my advice to the voter is be aware of these three forces at work against you and vote wisely
Right.
from there on.
Very good advice.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Really appreciate you being here. And yes, that's all we have for today.
Thank you.
Thank you.